Hey Midnights. Thank you for listening to Midnight Overdose. Where are you listening from? Our next story, Ancient Lunar Conquerors reshape Earth in brutal first strike. The humid summer night air hung heavy over the small town of Oakhaven, thick with unspoken anxieties. Yet, inside the cramped, gear-filled shed behind Liam's house, the atmosphere wasn't just electric with excitement, it hummed with an almost desperate anticipation. This was the sanctuary of the Stargazers, four friends whose bond was forged under the vast, indifferent gaze of the cosmos, a bond now tested by a secret that could shatter their world. Liam, a lanky 16-year-old whose perpetually messy mop of brown hair seemed to defy gravity, hunched over his laptop. His eyes, usually distant and dreaming, were now narrowed, fixed on shimmering lines of celestial data that pulsed with a malevolent rhythm. He was the group's reluctant seer, burdened by visions of what might be, often dismissed until his unsettling prophecies began to materialize. Beside him, Maya, the group's unwavering anchor, meticulously adjusted the focus of their well-worn reflector telescope. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, framed by a curtain of dark hair, betrayed a tension that belied her calm movements. Maya was the pragmatist, the one who grounded Liam's audacious theories with cold, hard facts, but even her scientific rigor was being strained by the impossibility of their discovery. Across from them, Noah, a whiz with anything electronic, his bright red hair a defiant flame against the dim light, furiously resoldered a homemade signal amplifier. A perpetual smirk usually played on his lips, but tonight his jaw was set, his brow furrowed. If it had wires, circuits, or a flickering screen, Noah could master it, and he was pushing his genius to its absolute limit, desperate to pull a clear signal from the void. And finally, Chloe, the quiet observer, meticulously logged coordinates in a battered notebook, her pen scratching a frantic counterpoint to the hum of the electronics. Her presence was understated, but her gaze was keenly perceptive, an intuitive mind that often saw the subtle, horrifying implications others missed. She was the one who felt the weight of their discoveries most acutely, a silent tremor of dread that ran through her every time they pinpointed another anomaly. Tonight, however, was different. For weeks, they'd been picking up faint, anomalous energy signatures emanating from the far side of the moon, signals that defied any known natural phenomenon, growing stronger, more insistent. Liam, zoom in on Mare Orientale, Maya commanded, her voice taut, strained by a mixture of anticipation and raw dread. The spikes are getting stronger there. Far too strong. Liam's fingers flew across the keyboard, his breath catching in his throat. The image on the screen zoomed in, resolving what they'd initially dismissed as geological anomalies into incredibly precise, angular structures. Too precise to be anything but artificial. No way, Noah breathed, abandoning his soldering iron, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. Those aren't natural. They look like cities. On the moon. A shiver, cold and bone-deep, ran down Chloe's spine. And look at the patterns in the energy readings, she whispered, her finger trembling as it traced a complex, repeating waveform on Liam's screen. It's not random. It's communication. A conversation that's been happening right above our heads. Over the next few weeks, the Stargazers lived and breathed the moon. School became an irrelevant distraction, sleep an unbearable luxury. They pooled their meager savings, upgrading their equipment, pushing the limits of their amateur setup into professional territory. They discovered more than just structures. They found movement. Fleeting shadows, almost imperceptible against the lunar dust, then geometric patterns of light that flashed across craters, all indicative of intelligent, technologically advanced life. But not friendly life. Their initial thrill, a pure, unadulterated awe of discovery, slowly morphed into a chilling dread. The energy signatures weren't just communication, they were rhythmic, pulsed with an undeniable, terrifying militaristic cadence. And then came the visual evidence. Using a new, highly sensitive camera attachment, they captured grainy, yet undeniably real, images of craft, sleek, dark vessels unlike anything humanity had ever conceived, launching from concealed lunar hangars and disappearing into the inky blackness of space, only to return hours later, their payloads a mystery. Their scouting, Maya concluded grimly one evening, her face pale and drawn in the cold glow of the monitor. They've been here for decades, hidden in plain sight. We've probably been under their observation since before we were even born. Chloe shivered. And how did they even find us? Noah, who had been sifting through decades of historical lunar observation data, suddenly gasped, a sound torn from his throat. Look at this. Every major satellite launch, every deep space probe we've ever sent. They've been met with subtle, almost imperceptible interference from the moon. They've been jamming us, blinding us, hiding their presence all along. His eyes widened, a new, horrifying theory clicking into place. But how did they get here? How did they even know we existed in the first place? Liam, lost in thought, traced a faint constellation on his screen. What if they didn't find us in the traditional sense? What if they were looking for something specific? The stargazers plunged deeper into the data, fueled by coffee and a terrifying urgency. What they unearthed, piecing together fragments of long-range sensor readings and decoded energy bursts, painted a chilling picture of an alien civilization unlike any imagined. They were the Xylus, a nomadic, parasitic race hailing from a dying star in a distant galaxy. Their homeworld, ravaged by an ancient stellar cataclysm, had forced them into a desperate, unending exodus. They were not explorers seeking knowledge, but conquerors seeking sustenance. Their civilization was built on a brutal philosophy of consumption. Planets were resources, and indigenous life forms were either eradicated or enslaved to exploit those resources. Their journey across the vast emptiness of space spanned eons, propelled by colossal, continent-sized generation ships. They didn't just find habitable worlds, they scoured the cosmic background radiation for the telltale signatures of nascent technological civilizations. Their long-range sensors were attuned to the subtle shifts in planetary energy signatures that marked the transition from pre-technological to technological societies. They looked for the faintest echoes of developing electrical grids, the rising thermal output of industrial centers, the initial, tentative broadcasts of radio waves, not as cries for help, but as dinner bells. Their discovery of Earth was not an accident, but a calculated detection. Roughly 5 centuries ago, their long-range probes, adrift for millennia in the interstellar void, registered a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from the squadron of the Orion Arm. It was the embryonic heartbeat of humanity's burgeoning scientific revolution, the first uses of rudimentary electricity, the distant, expanding light pollution from early cities, the groundbreaking but still weak radio signals that would soon blossom into the cacophony of the 20th century. To the Xylus, this was the unmistakable signature of a world on the cusp of advanced technological development, a world that would soon be capable of sustaining a much larger, more valuable biomass. They dispatched a scouting fleet, not to announce their presence, but to conduct a meticulous, centuries-long reconnaissance. They don't just stumble upon planets, Liam muttered, his voice hoarse, they hunt for them. For us. The Xylus had encountered countless other alien civilizations in their endless migrations. The data they were now inadvertently intercepting painted a gruesome history. They had systematically erased the Cthar, an aquatic species from a water world, their vast oceans boiled away to extract precious minerals. The Lumino, a species of sentient light beings, had been snuffed out, their unique energy harnessed as a power source until they flickered into oblivion. The ruins of these long-dead empires were not just silent testaments to the Xylus brutality, they were also a source of advanced technology, ruthlessly assimilated and weaponized. The Xylus learned from their victims, adapting their own physiology and technology to become the ultimate, efficient exterminators. They had found Earth centuries ago, a vibrant, teeming world ripe for the taking. But Earth's atmosphere, its unique magnetic field, its very ecosystem, required careful study before full colonization. The Moon, a silent, unblinking sentinel, was the perfect staging ground. From its far side, they could observe, analyze, and subtly manipulate, all while remaining unseen, masked by Earth's own gravitational shadow. For decades, their lunar fortresses had been growing, intricate networks of subterranean tunnels and cavernous hangars carved into the ancient rock, concealed from prying human eyes. They had even perfected a subtle cloaking technology, which Noah now realized was the source of the intermittent signal interference they'd logged for years, hiding their activities from human satellites and probes. The true horror of their long presence, however, was revealed in a series of disturbing, almost subliminal data bursts that Chloe began to isolate. These weren't related to military preparations, but to biological research. The Xylus weren't just observing Earth's geology, they were studying its dominant life form. For decades, scattered across the globe, there had been unexplained disappearances, hikers vanishing in remote forests, sailors lost at sea without a trace, individuals simply ceasing to exist. These were the whispers of abduction, not for study in the conventional sense, but for cold, clinical vivisection. The Xylus were dissecting humanity, analyzing its biological strengths and weaknesses, experimenting with pathogens and genetic modifications, all to find the most efficient means of subjugation and, ultimately, eradication. They harvested organs, extracted unique proteins, and studied neural pathways, not to understand, but to optimize their methods of control and resource extraction. The missing persons reports, dismissed as tragic accidents or criminal acts, were, in fact, the horrific tally of a long-term, clandestine scientific massacre. From the fragmented censored data, Chloe also started to piece together details about their abductors. The Xylus, she concluded, were not organic in the way humans understood. Their physical form was a synthesis of biological and technological components, a living machine. They stood roughly 8 feet tall, their bodies slender, almost skeletal, encased in a chitinous, obsidian black exoskeleton that absorbed all light. Their limbs were unnaturally long and articulated, ending in 3-digit manipulators with razor-sharp talons. Where eyes should be, there were twin, glowing red apertures that pulsed with a cold, calculating intensity. They possessed no discernible mouths. Their feeding process was entirely alien, involving a complex internal system that processed biological matter directly, extracting nutrients and energy from their victims' very essence. This chilling discovery explained the complete lack of physical remains left behind by their abductions. Their communication was not through spoken language, but through psionic resonance, a highly complex form of telepathy interwoven with precise energy bursts. This was the rhythmic pulse the stargazers had detected, a chilling, silent symphony of commands and data shared instantaneously among their ranks, inaccessible to human understanding without Noah's brilliant, desperate amplification and Chloe's intuitive pattern recognition. When they desired to broadcast to a lesser species, they employed a crude, mind-numbing wave of primal fear and confusion, punctuated by the stark, symbolic imagery of their dominance. The realization hit them like a physical blow, a crushing weight of cosmic deception. The moon, humanity's ancient, silent, watchful neighbor, was not benign. It was a hostile alien outpost, a fortress built in their very backyard. And judging by the escalating frequency of the craft launches and the terrifying power of the energy signatures, they weren't just observing anymore. They were preparing. And they already knew humanity inside and out. The whispers before the storm, first contact. Then, 2 days before the true assault, the whispers began. Not from the stargazers' amateur equipment, but from every major global communication network. Television screens flickered, radio static gave way to a chilling, guttural cadence, and internet feeds were briefly hijacked by a single, terrifying image, a stark, angular symbol, pulsing with an inner light, superimposed over a distant, swirling galaxy. It lasted only seconds, dismissed by most as a sophisticated hack, a viral marketing stunt, or a mass hallucination. But it was the Xylus' first contact. A declaration, not a greeting. A final, terrifying announcement of their arrival, broadcast not for understanding, but for shock and awe, designed to sow the first seeds of despair. The faint, high-pitched hum that accompanied it, the same frequency Chloe had noted during the abduction analysis, was the Xylus' silent voice, a sound designed to instill primal fear, echoing a long, grim history of other worlds silently warned before their annihilation. Noah, frantically analyzing the captured signal fragments, recognized the pattern. "It's a countdown," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Encoded in their energy signature. It's not random. It's imminent." One sweltering July night, as the countdown approached zero, the stargazers decided to get one last, desperate look. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a faint hope that their predictions might still be wrong, they drove their beat-up sedan to the highest point overlooking Oakhaven, a secluded hill offering a clear view of the night sky. The air crackled with unnatural tension, a prelude to the coming storm. Then, a sudden, blinding flash erupted from the direction of the town's industrial park, followed by a concussive roar that shook the car. Through their binoculars, they saw it. A massive, obsidian black craft, shaped like an inverted pyramid, slowly descended from the sky, its edges glowing with a malevolent crimson light. It wasn't hovering, it was landing. In the middle of Oakhaven. "No, no, no," Liam whispered, his face ghastly pale in the eerie light. "They're already here." They didn't wait for the main attack. Before they could fully process the shock, a section of the UFO's underside opened with a sickening hiss, revealing a ramp of pulsating energy. From within, the first Xylus emerged. They were even more terrifying in person. Their 8-foot forms moved with an unsettling fluidity, their black exoskeletons reflecting the flickering town lights like polished obsidian. The twin red apertures on their faces scanned the landscape with chilling efficiency. What followed was a nightmare of sound and light. The Xylus were not deploying weapons in the traditional sense, they were releasing concentrated bursts of psionic energy, not only to communicate but to attack. A chilling, High-pitched hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the human nervous system. Below, in the industrial park, the few late-night workers and unsuspecting civilians who had been drawn by the spectacle began to scream. But it wasn't the sound of pain, not entirely. It was a cacophony of utter, unreasoning terror. The stargazers watched, frozen in their car, as the Xylus moved with horrifying speed and precision. They didn't use energy blasts, they used their razor-sharp talons. People dropped, not with gunshots, but with silent, horrific punctures, their bodies spasming as their life force was seemingly siphoned away. A security guard, frozen by the psionic attack, simply crumpled as a Xylus effortlessly pierced his chest, leaving no wound, just a sudden, sickening stillness. Another, a lone truck driver trying to escape, was slammed into his vehicle by an invisible force, his screams cut short as a Xylus reached through the shattered window, its glowing red eyes fixed on him. There was no visible gore, no blood spray, just a rapid desiccation, a horrifying emptying of the human form. The Xylus were harvesting, not just killing, with a chilling, detached efficiency. They were collecting their biological data, one horrifying specimen at a time, their red eyes glowing brighter with each brutal, silent extraction. Panic, raw and unadulterated, rippled through the few onlookers who could still move. They scattered, their screams swallowed by the alien hum. It was clear the Xylus weren't here to destroy infrastructure, not yet. This was a hunt. A final, terrifying data collection before the main assault. The stargazers huddled in their car, their faces pressed against the windows, unable to tear their eyes away from the unfolding atrocity. This wasn't just a threat on their screens, it was real, visceral, and horrifyingly close. They had been right. They had seen it. And now, the world was about to see it too, in the most devastating, irreversible way imaginable. Outside, the first faint wail of distant sirens began to pierce the night, a lonely, futile cry against the gathering storm. The sky, once a source of wonder and endless possibility, was now a canvas for invasion, painted with the terrifying signatures of an alien armada. Then came the impact. Not a single impact, but a terrifying symphony of destruction that rippled across the globe. First, a series of colossal explosions ripped through the Pacific Ring of Fire. On Liam's monitor, the continental plates, usually depicted as stable lines, fractured and buckled with impossible speed. Gigantic, unprecedented earthquakes tore across land masses, leveling cities and turning mountains into dust. Tsunamis, hundreds of feet high, swept inland for miles, swallowing coastal metropolises whole, leaving only vast, brackish inland seas. In the shed, the very ground vibrated with a deep, sickening rumble, violently shaking the telescope off its tripod, rendering their precious instrument useless in the face of such raw, planetary violence. "They're attacking the fault lines." Noah screamed, his voice raw with horror. "They're trying to literally rip the planet apart. It's like they're carving us up for harvesting." The data streaming in confirmed his nightmare. The Xylus weren't just bombing cities, they were targeting geological weak points with precision energy blasts, aiming to trigger a planetary cataclysm. Subduction zones screamed under unimaginable pressure, triggering supervolcano eruptions in Yellowstone, Toba, and other long-dormant calderas. Ash plumes, miles high, blotted out the sun, plunging vast regions into an unnatural twilight, foreshadowing an approaching, bitter impact winter. Rivers boiled into steam, and lakes turned to acidic sludge. Asia fractured along ancient rifts, new islands rising amidst churning, superheated seas, while old ones vanished beneath the waves. South America convulsed, the Andes Mountains groaning as if in agony, spewing molten rock and toxic gases. Antarctica's ice sheets, destabilized by the tremors and the sudden shifts in global temperature, began to fracture and calve, unleashing icebergs the size of small nations into the rapidly rising oceans. Beyond the geological devastation, the alien attack was relentlessly strategic. Orbital bombardment rained down focused energy beams that vaporized entire urban centers, leaving behind smoking, glassed-over craters. Swarms of smaller, fighter-like craft descended, not to engage in aerial dogfights, but to deploy specialized atmospheric processors. These massive drones began siphoning off specific elements from the air, subtly altering the breathable composition, while simultaneously releasing airborne neurotoxins designed to incapacitate, not kill, making the remaining human population easier to round up and enslave. The global power grids, already struggling with the geological chaos, were systematically overloaded, plunging entire continents into darkness, severing the last ties of communication and coordination. Across the globe, Survivors emerged from shattered buildings into a landscape irrevocably transformed. Their familiar homelands were now alien, their maps obsolete. Panic, a tidal wave of it, swept through every continent. Emergency broadcasts, once dismissive, now screamed chaotic warnings of planetary shifts and inexplicable seismic activity. The airwaves filled with terrified reports, cities swallowed by new oceans, mountain ranges appearing where plains once lay, toxic fogs rolling in from erupting volcanoes, and the very shape of the continents altering under the brutal, unseen hand of the invaders. The Earth's magnetic field, a shield against the sun's lethal radiation, began to flicker and destabilize, its protective bubble weakening under the sustained assault. Satellites crashed from orbit, communication grids failed, and the once reliable compass spun wildly, a useless needle in a world turned upside down. The long-term implications were terrifying: a sky exposed to cosmic rays, increased cancer rates, and a slow, agonizing unraveling of the delicate biosphere. The stargazers watched, numb with horror, as their home, their world, was torn asunder. Their warnings had been ignored, and now the price was being paid in the very fabric of the Earth. The fight for Earth had begun, and 4 teenagers, armed with nothing but their intelligence, their unwavering friendship, and a battered telescope, had been the only ones to see it coming. Their warning, tragically unheeded, would now unfold before a stunned, terrified, and utterly unprepared humanity. Their years of solitary stargazing had prepared them for a battle no one else knew was coming, a battle that would decide the very fate of their planet and their species.